the confession no one saw coming. There are moments in life that arrive quietly without warning, yet they shape the rest of existence like a tide that cannot be reversed. Keanu Reeves had lived many lives inside himself. The public recognized him as the gentle soul with tragic depth, the actor whose face became part of cinema history, a man who walked through fame like a monk walks through silence. Yet behind that gentle calm lived storms no cameras ever captured. Sandra Bullock, equally adored, equally resilient, carried her own universe of unsaid words, unfinished emotions, and a heart that learned to heal even when breaking felt easier. Their friendship was known, their chemistry undeniable, but what remained unseen was the weight of everything left unspoken for decades. This story begins not with glamour or a red carpet, but with a quiet evening where truth finally demanded to breathe. Keanu had invited Sandra to a private charity event in Los Angeles, intimate, quiet, nothing extravagant, just a gathering to raise funds for children who had lost parents to long-term illness. He never liked large crowds, never enjoyed rooms filled with noise or superficial compliments. Instead, he preferred purpose, sincerity, kindness without applause. Sandra arrived wearing a simple black dress, hair elegantly swept back, no shimmering diamonds, no attempt to overpower a room. She understood simplicity the way he understood silence. Both were languages, and both felt like home when they shared the same space. As she walked through the warmly lit hall, she found Keanu standing alone near a piano, his fingers resting lightly on the keys, not playing yet but thinking, deeply, intensely, as though each key held a memory he hadn't dared to touch. When he turned and saw her, something in his eyes flickered, relief, nostalgia, maybe something more fragile, something he had buried long ago. He smiled gently, that familiar shy curve of his lips, the one fans adored but never fully understood. "You came," he said softly, like he wasn't sure she would. Sandra stepped closer, her voice warm but carrying threads of curiosity. "Of course I did, Keanu, you asked." She didn't know yet how much weight those 3 words held for him, you asked. Sometimes a person waits years just to hear someone say that without hesitation. For all the distance, for all the separate paths life carved, tonight felt like a return to a moment frozen in time. They talked like old friends do, slowly at first, catching up on life, laughing about ridiculous memories, sharing the softer truths they never shaped into gossip. But beneath the warmth there was tension, a silent current neither could ignore, like a confession waiting behind locked ribs. The evening moved gently, donors spoke, music played, glasses chimed like distant bells. Yet Keanu remained distracted, watching Sandra more than he intended to. She noticed his stillness, the way he drifted into thought even while smiling. After the event ended and most guests had left, silence settled like dusk on water. They walked together toward the small garden behind the hall, where string lights hung overhead like constellations set low enough to touch. The air smelled faintly of roses and night-blooming jasmine, and there was a quiet that encouraged truth without needing permission. Sandra sat on a wooden bench, her posture relaxed but her eyes searching him with warmth and gentle intelligence. Keanu stood for a moment, hands in pockets, gaze lifted to the stars as though gathering courage from them. Then he spoke slowly, heavily, like a man opening a vault inside his chest. "Sandra, there's something I've never said to anyone, not to the press, not to friends, not even to myself, in words that feel real." She inhaled softly, already sensing depth behind his voice. Keanu continued, each sentence like a trembling branch bearing the weight of years. "People see my films, they call me humble, gentle, kind, and I appreciate that. But there's a part of me that has always remained afraid. Afraid to hold happiness too tightly, afraid to love deeply because life has taken so much already." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't look away. "And there's something I've carried for a long time, Sandra, something about you." The world seemed to pause, even the wind felt still. Sandra didn't interrupt. She let silence be space for honesty to grow. Keanu took a breath, deeper than the last, filled with memories and sorrow and hope tangled together like threads of an unfinished story. "I always admired you," he said, voice low, steady, but vulnerable. "Not just as a co-star, not as a Hollywood icon people celebrate, but as a soul who survived, who laughed, who gave light even when life wasn't gentle. When we worked together, you were like sunlight, warm, real, unafraid to fall and rise again." Sandra's eyes softened, a sheen of emotion forming like dew on glass. She whispered, "Keanu," but he held up a gentle hand, asking for space to finish. "There were moments when I wanted to tell you," he continued, "moments when I felt something deeper, something I didn't have the courage to name, but I held back because I didn't want to break something good. Friendship felt safe. You felt too important to risk." He looked down, a hint of regret passing across his expression like shadow over water. Years passed, life changed, but the truth never really left. I don't know if it was love, not in the romantic sense people romanticize for tabloids. It was something more human, more spiritual, knowing you, seeing you, feeling grateful for your existence in my timeline. Sandra exhaled, long and silent, absorbing every word like a memory she never knew she needed. She placed her hand gently over his, not to answer, but to acknowledge. Her voice came like a soft wave, steady yet rich with depth. Keanu, you don't have to apologize for feeling something. Life gives us connections that don't have to fit into the labels people expect. I felt something too, not a confession kind of love, but a tenderness, a trust, a comfort that wasn't ordinary. You were always a safe place. Her cheeks glistened faintly under the dim lights, not tears of heartbreak, but of understanding. I just never knew if you needed to say it, she continued. Now I'm glad you did. For the first time in years, Keanu felt a release, like exhaling a truth he had been holding in for decades. Not to change their relationship, not to rewrite history, but to finally let honesty breathe. They sat for a long time, no words needed, shoulders almost touching, hearts speaking in the silence between them. It wasn't a love story beginning, it was an emotional confession finding peace, two souls recognizing each other without claims or expectations. The night had shifted. Something unseen had healed, when silence became the deepest language between them. The days that followed were filled with an unusual stillness, not the uncomfortable kind, but the type that comes when two people have seen a new layer of each other and are quietly learning how to carry that truth. After their conversation in the garden, neither Keanu nor Sandra felt the need to define what had been shared. It wasn't a love confession meant to rewrite life or steal hearts away from their rightful places. It was a wound finally given air after years of being sealed too tightly. It was a truth released not to spark romance, but to release weight, like setting a bird free from the cage of memory. Their connection felt lighter, purer, more honest, like fresh air after a thunderstorm. Sandra found herself thinking often about the look in Keanu's eyes, that mix of vulnerability, strength, regret, gratitude. The way a man like him, one the world viewed as quietly heroic, could still struggle with his own heart proved something important. Even gentle souls sometimes fear their own depth. Keanu, too, carried that night like a small ember in his chest, not burning painfully, not demanding action, but glowing softly. A reminder that truth, when spoken without expectation, can heal without requiring resolution. He thought about Sandra with a sense of peace he hadn't known before, like something finally set in place after years of being misaligned. Weeks passed. They returned to their own worlds, different films, different commitments, meetings in opposite continents, interviews under lights that never ask about the real things that matter. Yet the distance didn't dissolve what had changed. Instead, it gave space for reflection, for understanding what honest connection feels like when not forced or labeled. One evening, while Keanu was filming a project in Vancouver, he received a message from Sandra. Not long, not dramatic, just a photograph of a quiet lakeside trail with maple leaves scattered like rust-colored confetti and one sentence beneath it. "You would like this place." She didn't need to say more. He stared at the image for a long time, feeling something warm expand inside him, not longing recognition. He replied simply, "Show me one day." She sent back a single emoji, a small leaf, like a silent promise. Months later, when schedules finally aligned, that promise found its moment. Sandra invited Keanu for a short trip to Colorado, no red carpets, no press, no promotional agendas. Just two people meeting the way old friends should, without cameras, without scripts, without masks. The cabin she had chosen for the retreat sat beside a quiet lake, surrounded by tall pines that swayed like slow breathing. There was a fireplace stacked with wood, shelves filled with books that smelled of years, and windows so wide they framed the sky like living art. When Keanu arrived, Sandra greeted him not with grand excitement, but with that soft, warm smile, the kind that feels like home even in unfamiliar places. He hugged her gently, the kind of embrace that doesn't demand answers, only acknowledges presence. They spent the first night simply talking, not about Hollywood, awards, or industry chaos, but about childhood memories, old fears, strange dreams that refused to fade. They cooked together, laughing over burnt toast and unevenly chopped vegetables, the mundane moments becoming treasures because they happened without the world watching. The next morning, they walked along the lakeside trail Sandra had photographed. The path was quiet except for the rustle of leaves beneath their steps and the occasional bird cutting through the cool morning air. Keanu walked with hands tucked into his coat pockets, gaze drifting across the water that reflected the sky like liquid silver. Sandra walked beside him, matching his pace, neither rushing nor holding back. She noticed how calm he looked here, away from city noise, away from expectations. After a while, she spoke gently, her voice carrying curiosity rather than demand. "Keanu, that night at the charity event, after you said everything you said, did you feel lighter?" He nodded slowly, eyes still on the water. "I did, not because I changed anything between us, but because it was the first time I allowed myself to acknowledge you were part of my emotional history, not just my professional past." Sandra let his words settle, then smiled softly. "I'm glad you told me. People spend years hiding feelings they're afraid won't be understood. But when truth is spoken without asking for anything in return, it becomes peace instead of chaos." They sat on a wooden dock extending over the lake, legs dangling above water that rippled like memory touched by breeze. For a long time, neither spoke, because sometimes silence speaks louder than confessions. It wasn't romantic tension nor unfinished desire. It was something gentler, two souls resting, like weary travelers finding a seat after a long journey. Then Sandra said something unexpected, gentle, honest, brave. "You know, Keanu, I think we met each other at a time in life when we both needed warmth, not fireworks. People always assume connection must become love or it becomes nothing. But maybe some people are meant to be something in between, soul companions rather than lovers." Keanu turned to her with a depth in his eyes that held oceans of agreement. "Maybe that's the rarest kind of bond," he replied. "One that doesn't demand, doesn't claim, doesn't break when paths separate. One that survives because it never asked to be more than it naturally is." Sandra looked away, blinking slowly, her voice barely louder than the gentle lapping of water against wood. "Do you ever wish we explored the what-if?" Keanu took his time answering, not out of hesitation but reverence. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I think what-if exists to remind us that not all beautiful things must be lived to be real. Some are meant to be felt, not owned." His words weren't poetry, they were truth dressed in honesty, the kind that hurts and heals in the same breath. Sandra inhaled deeply, then nodded in acceptance. "You're right. And maybe the beauty of us is that we never had to break to learn each other." He smiled, a soft, grateful curve, knowing she understood him in a way few ever could. As the sun lowered into the horizon, painting the lake gold, they sat shoulder to shoulder, not needing declarations or promises. Their connection didn't crave definition. It simply was. A friendship built on quiet truths instead of loud emotions. A bond shaped by respect, vulnerability, and years of unspoken tenderness. In that stillness, something unexplainable settled inside both of them. Not love as the world knows it, but something perhaps deeper, the kind of emotional presence that remains even when life changes, even when distance returns, even when years pass without answers. Keanu looked at Sandra with eyes soft as dusk and said gently, "Thank you for being someone I could tell the truth to." And Sandra, with voice steady and warm, replied, "Thank you for trusting me with it. No need for more, no need for less." The letter that was never sent, but never forgotten. The journey back from Colorado did not separate them. Instead, it left both Keanu and Sandra with a feeling neither fully understood but quietly cherished. They returned to their worlds again, interviews, scripts, schedules stacked like stairs rising toward exhaustion. Yet something had shifted in the air between them, something not loud but undeniably present. They no longer communicated out of obligation or nostalgia. Every message, every call, every shared silence carried the weight of genuine presence. Their friendship was no longer a memory they occasionally revisited. It was a living, breathing truth they chose to nurture even from afar. Keanu often found himself thinking about the dock, about the way the water rippled like secrets being gently released, about the sentence Sandra spoke, soul companions rather than lovers. The words lingered in him like a slow-burning candle, offering clarity rather than sadness. Sandra carried her own reflections too, not regrets, not longing, but gratitude for a connection that didn't need possession to feel complete. Months rolled into a quiet year. Both worked tirelessly, delivering performances that stirred hearts around the world. Yet behind every red carpet, every laughter-filled interview, every moment captured by flashing cameras, there existed hidden stillness, a private channel of understanding that belonged only to them. Sometimes, Sandra would send him a photograph without context, a snowfall through her window, a journal page half filled with thoughts, an old movie ticket she found between books. Keanu replied with equal softness, a picture of his motorcycle resting against autumn leaves, a sketch he made at 2 a.m., a quote from a novel that reminded him of her resilience. They never needed a conversation to explain these exchanges. The images themselves carried emotion, like letters written without ink. But one particular evening marked a turning point neither anticipated. Sandra was returning from a late shoot when she found a small package waiting near her doorstep, wrapped in simple brown paper, tied not with ribbon but with twine, the kind of minimal gesture that felt like Keanu without needing confirmation. Inside, she discovered a leather-bound journal, untouched, pages blank, no inscription, except for one sheet of paper folded gently inside the cover. She opened it slowly, expecting a note, perhaps a few lines. But what she found instead was something deeper, a letter clearly written long ago but never sent. The handwriting was unmistakably his, gentle strokes, steady, imperfect, human. The date in the corner stunned her. It was from nearly 15 years earlier, a year after they first worked together. She sat down, heart steady but curious, and began to read. Sandra, there are things I wish I knew how to say to you when the cameras aren't watching, when there is no character to hide behind. I don't know if I'll ever give you this letter, but I hope one day I find the courage. You make the world softer just by existing in it, and maybe you will never know how many lives your light has touched. Yours touched mine quietly, without noise, without asking. I don't know if what I feel is meant to be spoken or simply held with gratitude. Maybe you were meant to be a chapter, or maybe you are something that stays without needing an ending. Whatever it is, I'm thankful our lives crossed, even if they never intertwined beyond friendship. I hope you always find warmth, even when the world feels cold. Okay. Sandra pressed the letter against her chest, eyes closed as a slow wave of emotion washed through her. Not sadness, not heartbreak, something softer, acknowledgement. Proof that the connection she always felt wasn't an illusion. He had carried her presence in his heart longer than she ever realized. She didn't call him immediately. Some emotions demand stillness before response. Instead, she placed the journal on her bedside table, beside a photograph of a sunset she once took during lonely years, now no longer a symbol of solitude, but of understanding. 2 days later, she invited him to her home, not with urgency, but with gentle intention. When Keanu arrived, he sensed the difference instantly. The way she looked at him with tenderness, with knowing, told him she had found something he once hid. Sandra held the journal carefully as she walked toward him, not accusing, not emotional, just real. I found this, she said softly, offering it to him like an artifact of time. He took a slow breath, eyes dropping to the leather cover, and she saw something in him break open, not painfully, but like a seismic shift releasing pressure long held beneath the surface. He sat, hands still around the journal, voice low and centered. I wrote it when I was young enough to be afraid of everything I felt and old enough to pretend I was. She listened closely, not interrupting. Keanu continued, gaze distant as though revisiting the version of himself who crafted those words. It was never a confession of love. It was a confession of gratitude, but I didn't know how to share something that vulnerable without fearing misunderstanding. Sandra sat beside him, not too close, not too far. Keanu, she murmured gently, you don't need to defend the past. That letter doesn't ask for answers, it simply shows truth. He exhaled slowly, relieved by her clarity. I never gave it to you because I thought it would complicate something simple. I have always feared breaking good things. Sandra smiled softly. You didn't break anything. You wrote honesty, and honesty is a gift even when delivered late. She turned slightly toward him, voice steady but warm. Do you want me to keep it? The question held weight, like asking whether a memory belongs to both or only one. Keanu looked up, eyes gentle, and whispered, If it gives you peace to keep it, then yes. Sandra nodded, and in that moment, 2 decades of unsaid history settled calmly between them. Not undone, not erased, understood. They moved to the porch, where evening light spilled across wooden planks like melted gold. They sat without speaking for several minutes, watching the sky bleed into shades of rose and violet. Sandra leaned back against the railing, arms loosely folded, her voice eventually breaking the silence like a soft tide. Sometimes I wonder, she said slowly, if life gives us emotional bonds not to keep but to teach. Keanu considered this, gaze thoughtful. Maybe the purpose of some connections is not possession but evolution. We grow because someone exists in our story, not because they stay physically beside us. Sandra looked at him with gentle understanding, her expression holding years of maturity and softness. And we didn't need romance to matter, Keanu nodded. We mattered anyway. It was not a grand revelation. It was not a cinematic moment of confessions blooming into love. It was something far rarer, 2 souls accepting the shape they naturally formed around each other without forcing it into a mold it was never meant to fill. The letter did not start a love story. It completed an emotional one. Their bond was not passion, it was peace. And sometimes, peace is the deepest form of love the world never recognizes. The night they faced their past without running from it. Time moved with gentle patience, neither rushing them forward nor pulling them into memories they weren't ready to face. The journal remained in Sandra's possession, not as a symbol of hidden love, but as a quiet testament to the emotional history they shared. A history built not on grand gestures, but on subtle moments, silent understanding, and the kind of connection people rarely recognize unless they have lived it themselves. After the discovery of the letter, their friendship matured into something deeper, more intentional, a space where neither needed to hide behind jokes or polite distance. They saw each other more clearly now, not as movie icons or public figures, but as two human beings who had once stood at the edge of something soft and unspoken, and who chose instead to protect the simplicity of connection rather than chase uncertainty. But life has a curious way of circling back to unfinished chapters. One afternoon, Sandra received an invitation she had never expected, a retrospective film event celebrating the legacy of cinema over the last 3 decades, and specifically highlighting on-screen chemistry that had shaped film culture. Their pairing, their work together, their laughter behind the scenes, it was all being showcased. They were being honored together, after years of moving in parallel worlds. She held the invitation quietly, staring at the words printed in elegant gold, knowing instantly that this would not be a casual appearance. This would be a reunion not just for public eyes, but for every emotion they had once placed gently aside. She called Keanu that evening, voice steady but layered with meaning. "We've been invited," she said, no further explanation required. He smiled softly through the receiver, a breath of calm mixed with realization. "Then we go, together." The event was hosted in an old theater in Hollywood, the kind with velvet curtains and chandeliers that held stories in crystal reflections. Standing side by side on the red carpet, they weren't acting, they were simply present, in a moment shaped by history and softened by acceptance. Cameras flashed like lightning, questions flew through the air, yet neither felt overwhelmed. They were grounded by each other's presence, by the knowledge of what they had already shared privately where no spotlight shone. Later, they sat front row as clips of their early work filled the screen, young versions of themselves laughing, running, exchanging scenes layered with chemistry the world celebrated for decades. Sandra watched her younger self with nostalgia, but also compassion, remembering the girl she was back then, ambitious, vibrant, sometimes unsure beneath confidence. Keanu watched too, quietly, recognizing how time had changed them yet left something essential untouched. Near the end of the showcase, a particular scene played, one where their characters looked at each other, not acting romance but breathing it unknowingly. It was a moment audiences still replayed, quoting dialogue that hinted at a deeper connection. The theater fell silent, almost reverent. Sandra felt her heart tighten, not with regret, but with recognition of a possibility they once never explored. She stole a slow glance at Keanu, who sat with hands folded, eyes fixed on the screen, expression serene yet reflective, as though he too was meeting his younger self across time. When the lights rose, applause erupted like thunder. They stood together, accepting the moment with grace, but the heaviness of that scene followed them beyond applause. After the event, exhaustion settled around them like warm fog, not physical, but emotional. Instead of attending the after-party, they left quietly through a side exit, walking to a small rooftop balcony overlooking the city like starlit glass. The night was cool, carrying hints of jasmine and city wind, the kind of evening that invites honesty without force. They leaned against the railing, side by side, watching headlights flow beneath them like rivers of restless time. Sandra spoke first, voice low, steady, contemplative. "Watching us like that, it felt like looking through a window into a life we never opened." Keanu nodded slowly, no hesitation in his agreement. A life that could have been but didn't need to be to matter. Her eyes glimmered under distant neon reflection. "Do you ever think," she asked carefully, "that if timing had been different, things might have unfolded another way?" He thought for a long moment, inhaling deeply as though pulling memories from beneath his ribs. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I think if we had tried to make it something defined, we might have broken what we have now. Love, true connection, doesn't always need to manifest in the way people expect." She listened, absorbing each word like warmth against winter. "And you're not someone I would want to lose to a failed attempt at something people romanticize but rarely sustain." The honesty between them grew like night-blooming flowers, silent, profound, delicate. They were not avoiding truth, they were honoring it. Keanu turned toward her more fully, voice gentle but unguarded. "There was a time," he said, "when I thought our chemistry might become a life together. But I learned something over the years. Not every deep bond is meant to become a story with rings and vows. Some are meant to become a lifelong emotional home without needing a physical address. Sandra exhaled softly, eyes soft as open sky. And we are that for each other, aren't we? A home made of understanding rather than possession. He smiled, a small, peaceful smile, the kind only truth can shape. Yes. They stayed on that rooftop until the early hours of morning, not discussing romance, not mourning what never became, but celebrating what quietly endured. Two souls who might have loved in another lifetime, but who chose grace instead of longing. It was a kind of love the world rarely recognizes, one built not on claiming, but on respecting the sacredness of what was already perfect in its unfinished form. Sandra placed her hand lightly over his, not intertwining fingers but simply touching, like a punctuation mark at the end of an unspoken sentence. Keanu didn't move away. He didn't tighten his grip. He simply remained present, letting the moment be exactly what it was: complete, sufficient, beautifully unresolved. And as dawn began to soften the horizon, they watched it together in silence. The kind of silence born not from lack of words, but from the fullness of everything that had already been said. The conversation that redefined what love means. Dawn slowly bled into gold, washing over the quiet rooftop where Keanu and Sandra remained seated like 2 pages of a story that had never been rushed to its next chapter. The early light painted their faces softly, revealing tired eyes that weren't exhausted from events or cameras or applause, but from emotional honesty, the kind that takes courage to release and even greater courage to sit with. Neither wanted to move first. Neither felt compelled to fill the silence with unnecessary words. They were in a rare moment of peace, a space where truth existed without pressure, where past did not demand resolution and future did not demand definitions. In a world obsessed with labels, they were something undefinable yet deeply real, and they both knew it. Eventually, the sun rose high enough to remind them that the rest of the world was waking, schedules waiting, responsibilities aligning like trains on inevitable tracks. Sandra broke the stillness with a thoughtful breath, her voice low but steady, carrying a tone of quiet understanding. Keanu, it's strange, isn't it? How something so meaningful doesn't need to be owned to be cherished. He nodded, inhaling cool morning air, hands resting loosely on the railing as though grounding himself in the moment. Maybe that's the purest form of connection, he replied gently. One without expectation, without demand, without fear, just presence. She smiled at that, not the bright Hollywood smile cameras loved, but a small, sincere curve of the lips that held gratitude and acceptance. After leaving the rooftop, they walked through still empty streets, the city quiet as though granting them an unspoken blessing. They reached a small cafe at the corner, one that opened early for locals, not celebrities. Keanu ordered black coffee, Sandra tea with honey. They sat at a corner table, back against morning light streaming through the window, 2 ordinary people, in ordinary clothes, sharing something extraordinary yet invisible to anyone else. The waiter didn't recognize them, and neither corrected it. That anonymity felt like a gift, a reminder that beneath fame, they were simply 2 souls navigating emotion with humility. Their conversation flowed with ease, not about past roles or career highs, but about life, not the one seen on screens, but the one lived quietly behind them. Sandra spoke about the challenges of balancing her heart and her public image, how people often projected narratives onto her life that she herself never lived. Sometimes the world thinks they know your story better than you do, she said, stirring her tea slowly, eyes thoughtful. Keanu understood better than most. People see the silhouette, not the soul, he responded. They see the actor, not the man who goes home alone some nights, thinking about things no one will ever ask. Sandra looked up, meeting his gaze with empathy that didn't pity but recognized. We both learned how to carry our loneliness gracefully, she said. He nodded. But maybe we were never as alone as we thought. And for the first time in many years, Keanu asked her something deeply personal, not for closure, but for understanding. Sandra, he murmured, voice soft, if life had been kinder to both of us earlier, do you think we might have chosen each other? She didn't answer immediately because this was not a question to be taken lightly. Her eyes drifted toward the window, watching sunlight climb the glass like a slow, patient truth. When she finally spoke, her words were tender but grounded. Maybe. Or maybe we would have ruined something priceless by forcing it to be something it wasn't ready to become. She turned back to him, gaze direct. Not every beautiful connection is meant to become a love story. Some are meant to stay as gentle truth, something steady, something forever, but in a different shape. Keanu let her words sink into him like water into dry soil. He had loved before, lost before, mourned before. He knew the fragility of attachment and the weight of expectation. And what he felt with Sandra wasn't a hunger for possession, it was a gratitude for presence. They were not unfinished lovers. They were completed souls, intertwined beyond romance. The world might never understand that, but understanding was not owed to the world. Later that afternoon, they took a quiet drive through the hills, windows down, wind soft, radio playing old songs that once belonged to younger versions of themselves. There were no glamour cars, no entourage, no staged photographs, just two people sharing a road that curved like time itself. Sandra rested her head lightly against the seat, eyes half closed, listening rather than speaking. Keanu drove with the calm of a man who found something rare, peace inside connection rather than chaos inside desire. Every mile felt like a chapter, turning without pressure to reach an ending. When they reached a scenic overlook, they stepped out again, wind sweeping through their hair, sky stretching wide like a canvas meant only for them. Sandra watched horizon meet earth, voice quiet as memory. "You know something," she said slowly. "I think one of the hardest lessons we learn is that love doesn't always mean choosing each other. Sometimes love means honoring connection even when it never becomes possession." Keanu looked at her, really looked, and there was tenderness in his expression shaped from years of unspoken truths. "And we honored it by not holding too tightly," he replied, "by letting it breathe." They stood there for a long time, the view below endless valleys of faded blue and green. No confessions demanded, no regret needed. Instead, there was understanding, the kind so rare it becomes sacred. Sandra turned to him gently. "I want you to know something," she said, voice steady, without shaking. "You changed me, not with romance, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet way you saw me without needing anything in return." Keanu swallowed softly, heart warm with acknowledgement. "And you changed me," he answered, "by being someone I could trust with a truth I carried too long alone." Their eyes met, not with longing, not with missed opportunity, but with gratitude for a connection that existed quietly, beautifully, without needing definition. And in that exchange, in the simplicity of truth spoken without demand, they found something stronger than romance could ever promise. Not an ending, not a beginning, a continuation. A love shaped like friendship, a friendship shaped like love. Unclaimed, undefinable, enduring. The moment life tested their unspoken bond. Life has a rhythm, soft, unpredictable, sometimes gentle like rain against a window, sometimes sharp like glass beneath bare feet. It does not care about timing, nor does it pause simply because two people are finally at peace with their shared truth. After the hills, the rooftop dawns, the rediscovered letter and the conversation that redefined what love could mean without needing to be named. Both Keanu and Sandra returned to work once again. But this time they returned with lighter hearts, with deeper understanding, with a connection no longer ghosted by speculation or quietly buried emotion. They reached a place where they did not need validation from each other or from the world. Their bond existed like a calm heartbeat, steady, present, comforting even at a distance. Yet life, in its mysterious way, decided to test the quiet foundation they built. Months later, while Keanu was filming an emotionally intense project overseas, Sandra found herself facing something life-changing. Not a rumor, not a scandal, but something far more personal. Her sister fell severely ill, the kind of illness that doesn't knock before entering, the kind that forces you to sit in waiting rooms where time moves like melting ice. Sandra spent nights by hospital beds, days speaking to doctors in hallways where hope and fear blended into a single breath. The industry assumed she was simply taking time for rest, but only a handful knew the truth. Keanu was one of them. She didn't call him first. The news was too heavy to translate into words. Instead, she sent him a short message one night, not detailed, not descriptive, just an unspoken request wrapped in simplicity. "I might need you." She didn't ask for advice. She didn't call for comfort. She simply reached toward the person who, without demands or expectations, had always been a harbor of calm. Keanu was thousands of miles away when he received that message, standing on a hotel balcony overlooking a city he barely recognized. But distance dissolved instantly. He felt her words settle in him like a stone dropped into still water. He didn't hesitate. He booked a flight home that same night. 2 days later, he walked into the hospital where Sandra waited, weary, emotionally drained, trying to remain strong not for herself but for her sister and her family. When she saw him at the end of the corridor, she didn't break down in tears the way some might imagine. Instead, she simply breathed deeply, slowly, as if his presence allowed her lungs to fill fully for the first time in weeks. No dramatic embrace, no cinematic collapse. They stood before each other quietly, like two souls meeting in the place where vulnerability and strength coexisted without contradiction. Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder, grounding her with the kind of support that did not need to be spoken. "I'm here," he said softly. It was enough. It was everything. Days turned into a rhythm of care. Keanu remained by her side, not as a lover, not as a savior, but as a steady presence in a moment where life felt unpredictable. He sat with her through long nights when machines beeped like anxious heartbeats, when hope wavered between fragile and firm. He brought her food she often forgot to eat, walked her outside when the walls of worry felt too tight, told quiet stories that didn't try to fix pain but walked beside it. He never overstepped. He never tried to turn vulnerability into intimacy. He simply stayed, a human anchor in a storm that neither fame nor success could shield her from. One evening, after doctors delivered another uncertain update, Sandra finally allowed herself to break, not loudly, but with a slow tremble in her voice as she and Keanu sat in the dim hospital garden where yellow lamps cast soft halos against night. Her hands shook slightly, and Keanu noticed the way she clasped them together as if holding herself from falling apart. He didn't rush her. He waited with patience, with presence. And when she finally spoke, it came out in one long breath, heavy but honest. "I've been strong for everyone for so long, Keanu, but I'm so afraid of losing her, and I don't know who I'm supposed to be if I can't save the people I love." He listened fully, completely, without interrupting, without trying to solve grief that could not be solved. When she fell into quiet, he responded with wisdom shaped from years of carrying his own losses. "You don't have to save everyone," he said gently, voice steady like calm water. "Sometimes love isn't about saving, it's about standing beside someone through the things you can't change." Sandra closed her eyes, letting those words settle into the places fear had taken root. "But what if I lose her?" She whispered. He did not say she wouldn't. He didn't offer hollow promises. Instead, he took her hand and held it with quiet strength. "Then she won't go alone. She'll go knowing she was loved fiercely, and that matters more than any cure we wish we could give." Tears finally escaped her, slow, silent, honest, slipping down her cheeks like rain finding a path it always meant to travel. Keanu didn't wipe them away. He simply sat closer, allowing her grief to exist without shame. And in that moment, Sandra realized something profound. Love is not always romance, not always grand declarations. Sometimes love is someone sitting beside you while your world shakes, someone who holds the pieces even when they cannot fix them. Weeks passed. Sandra's sister slowly stabilized, not fully healed, not cured, but fighting with strength the doctors once feared she wouldn't find. Hope, fragile but present, returned like morning light through heavy curtains. Through it all, Keanu remained, not every day, but enough. Enough to be chosen presence rather than obligated comfort. Enough to prove that some bonds deepen in the quiet moments of suffering more than in years of laughter. One night, as they walked out of the hospital after another day of uncertainty wrapped in small progress, Sandra stopped beneath the glow of a street lamp, turning to face him with something new, not confession, not longing, but clarity. "You know," she said softly, "if I ever believed in soulmates, I don't think I would use that word for lovers. I think I would use it for people like you, the ones who show up when life is at its hardest, who hold space for truth without asking for more than presence." Keanu looked at her, gentle eyes, steady breath, quiet understanding. "Maybe soulmates aren't meant to be lovers," he replied. "Maybe they're meant to be the people who know us beyond what the world sees, who walk with us through shadows without needing credit for standing in the dark." Sandra stepped closer, not out of desire, but gratitude. Their foreheads almost touched, not like a kiss, but like a prayer. A moment that didn't need lips, only presence. Two souls. Not owning. Not missing. Just knowing. And as they stood beneath that streetlight, wrapped not in passion but in profound companionship, they understood their story did not need to transform into romance to be complete. It was already whole. It always had been.